So without a doubt, one of the easiest ways to grow mushrooms at home is by using a mushroom growing kit. This allows you to grow fresh mushrooms in your kitchen without any expensive equipment, without any specialized tools. All you need to do is get a mushroom growing kit and basically let it do its thing. In this video, we're going to be growing mushrooms from a kit, and I'll show you the whole process from opening the kit up and preparing it all the way to harvesting fresh gourmet mushrooms. So this is the kit we're going to be using. This is a Back to the Roots mushroom growing kit. This is Pearl Oyster. Yeah, not affiliated with this company or anything like that, but I have used these kits before and they do work pretty well. So mushroom grow kits come in a variety of different sizes and in a variety of different species, but they're basically all the same. They're basically just mushroom fruiting blocks, which are, substrates, typically hardwood sawdust and bran or some kind of other thing that mushrooms like, that have already been colonized with mushroom mycelium. And as you can see, this one, the mushroom mycelium is completely overtaken all of that substrate. So basically all the hard work has been already done for you. All you need to do is take it out of the box and go ahead and fruit and grow the mushrooms. Now, if we follow the instructions on this kit, what it says to do is to cut an X on the top of the block to kind of reveal that mycelium, and then take a fork and scrape off some of that excess mycelium or some of the older mycelium on the top to kind of expose fresh mycelium, and then hydrate it or rehydrate it by soaking it in water overnight. And this is going to rehydrate the block, but also kind of initiate that pinning or initiate that process where little mushrooms will start to form on top of this block. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and follow these instructions. Once all that's done, we can put it in an area that's nice and humid, that gets kind of some ambient light or diffuse ambient light and fresh air, and just watch these mushrooms grow. So a simple, easy process, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cut an X on the top of the block, and you can see now it's totally exposed. And right away, when you open it up, you can smell nice, fresh oyster mushroom mycelium. You can always tell if your block is contaminated or if your mushrooms are contaminated because it would smell kind of rancid, but fresh, nice, clean mushroom spawn or mushroom mycelium has a very distinct smell, and once you know it, you know exactly what good mushrooms smell like, for lack of a better word. So, okay, now that I got the kit opened up, again, the other thing too is, like, my hands are clean, I did wash them, but at this point the mycelium is pretty resistant to contamination, or the block is pretty resistant to contamination, because it's already been fully colonized. So there's no nutrients left or nothing left for bacteria or mold spores to land on and start to contaminate it. So at this point, it's the same with fully colonized grain spawn. Like, once the mushroom mycelium is fully taken over, then it's relatively resistant to contamination. So yeah, like the instructions say, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of scrape it with a fork. So scrape off that top layer of mycelium, exposing some of that fresher mycelium underneath. So yeah, looking at this, I'm not sure exactly what the substrate is that was used for this fruiting block. Typical substrate would be something like hardwood sawdust and bran, or maybe soy hulls. This looks like it could be something like coconut husk or something. I really have no idea. I want to reach out and see exactly what it is. But I mean, obviously the mushrooms like it because this block is, beautifully fully colonized and ready to go. So yeah, now we're just going to put it in water and soak it overnight. So your fruiting block or your mushroom kit will float in the water, so just make sure you put it upside down so that the X, or the part that you cut, is facing downwards and completely submerged in the water. If you want, you can always put something heavy on top, but this one looks like it's totally fine, totally submerged. So yeah, we'll just kind of leave it like that overnight and check it in the morning, and it'll be ready to put into fruiting conditions. So these mushroom growing kits are super easy to use, and the intention of them is just to be able to put that bag kind of back in the box and be able to put that pretty much anywhere that has nice diffuse lighting, and keep it humid by just using a spray bottle. In fact, the box actually comes with a tiny little spray bottle that you can use to kind of keep your mushrooms humid, because if at any time it dries out, if the top of the block gets too dry, or if the mushrooms get too dry when they're growing, there's a good chance that they'll stop growing or maybe even not grow at all, because mushrooms do require a lot of humidity And oysters in particular require a fair amount of fresh air in order to grow, and maintaining that balance of fresh air and humidity is actually, somewhat difficult. So depending on where you live, depending on the climate inside your house, it can actually make a pretty big difference on the success that you have with these kits. So if you live in a much more arid environment or a dry environment, there's a chance that this mushroom kit might not work all that well for you. But if you want to kind of cheat the system and make your own mushroom fruiting area or mushroom fruiting chamber, it's pretty easy to do, and that's what this thing is behind me. This is a shotgun fruiting chamber, and basically it's just a environment that will provide enough humidity, and you can put enough fresh air in there by opening the lid and waving it down so it gets enough fresh air, so that you don't have to worry about your mushrooms drying out. So I'll show you real quick what a shotgun fruiting chamber is, and we're actually going to be using the shotgun fruiting chamber to grow this mushroom kit instead of just growing it in the box on the counter. So yeah, a simple shotgun fruiting chamber is really easy to make. It's basically just a clear tote that I've peppered with holes every couple inches with a 1/4 inch drill bit, and then we took a bag of perlite, we soaked it in water, allowed the perlite to soak up that moisture, allowed that to drain, and then filled the bottom couple inches of this tote with that moist perlite, which will kind of release that moisture over time, keeping the inside of the box humid. And then in order to grow the mushrooms, you just need to kind of pay attention to the inside every once in a while, come by, fan it down so it gets some more fresh air in there, and maybe spray it with a spray bottle if you find your mushrooms are getting too dry. Now I've also got this plastic sheet underneath the shotgun fruiting chamber because there's holes on the bottom, so eventually there will be some water that kind of drips out the bottom. So I've got that plastic sheet just to protect wherever it happens to be. Now, where you put your shotgun fruiting chamber is pretty important as well. Again, mushrooms want humidity and fresh air, but they also need a little bit of light. Not direct sunlight, you don't want it to heat up or anything like that, but nice diffuse lighting. So if you can put it maybe near a window, away from any drafts, but also away from direct sunlight. So we'll get that nice ambient light that the mushrooms need to grow, but not that direct sunlight that might heat it up too much or maybe cause it to dry out. So it's only been a couple days now since I started seeing the pins, and if we look at it today, the oyster mushrooms are growing really fast. But you can already tell that they're starting to grow really kind of tiny caps and thin stems. And again, this is just a result of oyster mushrooms needing a lot of fresh air. They're kind of notorious for doing this and for growing way differently depending on how much fresh air they actually have. So if oyster mushrooms are grown, for example, outside where they're getting a lot more fresh air, it almost looks like a completely different species where the cap of the mushroom will grow just massive. Whereas when they're growing indoors, they're a lot more restricted in how much fresh air they can get, so they take on a whole different look. So the challenge here is managing to give the oysters enough fresh air while still trying to maintain that high humidity. So basically what I'm doing now is just making sure I'm fanning the box down as often as I can while continuing to spray it, and even just leaving the corner of the lid open a little bit in order to more easily allow the mushrooms to kind of exchange air and get that CO2 level down and grow as normal looking caps as possible. Okay, so it's been about another 24 hours now since the last update, and as you can see, the mushrooms are continuing to grow really fast. It's just incredible how fast these things actually grow from initial pin to full-size mushrooms in just a couple of days. We're still getting some pretty decent, great-looking mushrooms, and the block is flushing wonderfully. There's a lot of fruit bodies and a lot of mushroom that's growing off of this tiny little block. So we're probably not that far away from harvesting it. I'm probably gonna harvest it in maybe a day or so, but I just wanna show you quickly too, if you want to improve the automation of your shotgun fruiting chamber, a piece of equipment you can use that you can put on a timer so you don't have to spray it or fan it down nearly as much. So this is a rectifogger, and you can get it at pet stores, and what it's used for is to increase the humidity in, terrariums for geckos and stuff like that. But it works really well to humidify mushrooms on a small scale. And basically all it is a bottle of water that you fill up, and there's a little ultrasonic humidifier in there and a little fan, and it will pump in humid air through this hose. So you can just simply turn it on, and I have it on a timer, so it goes on a timer every 15 minutes, every hour it goes on for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you can see when it's turned on. Once it gets going here, we'll just crank it up a little bit more. So you can see when it gets turned on, it's pumping in some nice humid air with that ultrasonic humidifier. So not only is that increasing the humidity inside this shotgun fruiting chamber, but since it's blowing it in, it's also bringing in some nice fresh air. So it'll really reduce the amount of time you need to spend opening up your chamber, spraying it down, and fanning it down. So it's a nice little piece of equipment that can kind of automate your grows a little bit. I like to kind of put it down near the bottom and just kind of drape it over the top, and it will pump in some nice humid air into your fruiting chamber and help your mushrooms grow and help your mushrooms get the conditions that they need. And then in terms of the lid, you can just kind of leave it on top, kind of cracked open a little bit, leave some room for that hose, and just leave some room for the shotgun fruiting chamber to continuously exchange fresh air. So I'm just gonna let these mushrooms grow for another 24 hours or so, and then we're gonna harvest them, make a nice meal out of them, and then I can let you know what you can do with the mushroom grow kit after you've harvested the mushrooms. Okay, so it's the big day. These mushrooms are now ready to be harvested, and you can see just how well this turned out and how many mushrooms we got off this one tiny little block, and they actually look pretty good. They got some nice big caps, and we ended up getting a huge bounty of oyster mushrooms. And what's amazing to think is that we only cut the X in this block 8 days ago, and it only started showing pins about 4 days ago, so you can see how fast these mushrooms really grow, and they're totally ready to be harvested now. In fact, they're a little bit later than I'd typically like to harvest oyster mushrooms. See, with oysters, you want to harvest them kind of right before the cap starts to curl up, which is the oyster mushroom telling you that it's reached the end of its life cycle and it's ready to drop its spores. So these ones have started to curl up a little bit, but they haven't started to drop a lot of spores yet, which means it's a perfect time to harvest them. So we're gonna go ahead and harvest these mushrooms, and all we're gonna do to do that is basically take a knife and cut the whole clusters off right off the top of the block, and then kind of remove any of that excess material that's still on the block. And the reason we want to do that is because this isn't the only crop or the only harvest that we can get off of this block. In fact, once we harvest it, we can hydrate it again, put it right back into fruiting conditions, and you'll get a second flush and maybe even a third flush of these big, beautiful oyster mushrooms. So you can get a lot of food off of these tiny blocks, and actually, if you had the right equipment to do it, you can remove a tiny piece of this mycelium, put it on agar, make grain spawn, and make your own fruiting blocks in perpetuity, because you can basically save this culture and just keep growing it out and making your own fruiting blocks. But that does require some specialized equipment, and you definitely don't need to do that to enjoy your kits and to get lots of mushrooms off your kit. So we're gonna go ahead and harvest this block and then cook up some tasty mushrooms. Yeah, so all we're gonna do to harvest this block is simply grab whole clusters of oyster mushroom and kind of cut it right off the base of the block. And then what you want to do on this block is just kind of remove these extra pieces of mycelium and any kind of fruiting bodies that you aren't going to use, just because then you can rehydrate the block. And if you don't remove these will just end up kind of decomposing when you try to get your second flush. So it's best to remove all of this excess material before you try to rehydrate it and get your second flush. So we got about 262 grams of mushrooms, and that's pretty incredible to think that it came off that tiny little block. But by far with oyster mushrooms, the best part is the cap. That's gonna be tender and just delicious, whereas the stem can be quite a bit chewy and definitely not as good. So we're gonna prepare these by removing much of the stem and then just cooking up the cap part. So that's it. I'd say that was a huge success. Now we got tons of these beautiful oyster mushroom caps. And for these ones, there's a million different ways that you can cook oyster mushrooms, but basically we're just gonna fry them up in some butter with some herbs, and you can add them to, pretty much any kind of dish. And it's such a great way and an easy way to grow food at home. So we got a nice little bounty of oyster mushrooms here. We're gonna cook these up, and then I'm gonna rehydrate that block and put it right back into the fruiting chamber to try and grow another flush of mushrooms. So yeah, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed learning how to grow mushrooms from a kit. If you're interested in growing your own kit, I have some links to some mushroom kits in the description below. But until then, I'm gonna go cook these up and enjoy these mushrooms. So thanks so much for watching. I'm Tony from Fresh Cat Mushrooms, and we'll see you in the next video.